I've got some bouncing around to do. So on the screen, not this. So there's several things I wanted us to look at. So you'll remember that the trip came along here. We're going to pick it up in our story today in Acts 27, right around in here, as Paul's headed to Rome. But there's a couple things I wanted to point out. So do you remember who is with Paul? Let's go to the early part of chapter 27. Yeah, verse 2. Who's with Paul? So there's a centurion, right? His name is? Julius. Good Roman name, right? Who's the fellow traveler that's with Luke and Paul? You notice the language is still we here, so it's Luke, right? So Aristarchus. Where do we first encounter Aristarchus? Do you all remember? Do you remember where there was a big riot and everybody got pulled into the theater? Remember that story? In Acts 19 in Ephesus. If you go back to Acts 19, you'll see that Aristarchus was one of the people that was dragged into the theater with Paul. So that's kind of our first introduction to Aristarchus. He's also mentioned in Colossians 4 and in Philemon as when Paul's closing each of those letters, he says, Aristarchus sends greetings. So Aristarchus is with him then. And at that point, I love this map. At that point, Paul is in Rome, where he wrote Ephesians, Colossians, 2 Timothy, Philemon, and probably Philippians. So it makes sense that he would mention Aristarchus as he wrote Colossians and Philemon, because Aristarchus is on this trip, and he made it all the way to Rome with Paul. So this note here in verse 2 of 27 that Aristarchus was with him is worth noting that this is one of the companions. He's a Macedonian. We see him earlier in Acts. He's one of the group that kind of sailed ahead to Troas, and Luke and Paul and the group kind of catch up with him later at Troas. He is a Macedonian, Aristarchus is. So some interesting history there. A man obviously very committed to Paul and his work. And I wanted to touch base on that. Another thing I wanted to mention, because we're going to get into this part of the story this morning, is the weather. It was kind of fun trying to research ancient weather, because there weren't a lot of meteorologists. Weather Channel was not online yet. But there's all these different islands and different bodies of water and mountains, and all this stuff makes for a very complex weather environment in this area of the world. When you look at, when we're going to see in a little bit that it's a northeaster that blows the ship, that means that a high pressure system must have developed in this area and caused those winds, because the winds, it's always interesting in chapter 27 to note where the winds are coming from, because they're sailing, right? So the winds are against them at one point as they're headed to Rome. Then the winds blow gently from the south, which is a good thing, because you could sail with a gentle wind from the south. But then it changes when this weather system starts, and it starts blowing this direction from the northeast down this way. And we'll look at another satellite image here in just a minute. So we saw Dr. Manner's video on sailing along the coast. I'm going to skip through some of this that we've looked at. Get to my next marker here. There we go. So this is Crete. And they were, way up here, and they sailed down. It says they came across Salmone. We don't know exactly where that is, but it's somewhere on this side of the island. And they're coming around. It says the wind was against them, and they come to Fair Havens. Now, there's right about there, where that sea is in Crete, is Mount Ida. It's about an 8,000-foot peak. And they said when the wind blows from the northeast, not only do you get the complications of the sea temperatures that time of year changing, and the climate changing, the winds, weather systems changing, but that 8,000-foot peak and the valley that's off here to this one side kind of act like a big funnel, and they really concentrate that wind a lot. So you'll notice, I wonder how far I'm gonna have to go if I remember my deck here. Let's go back all the way, because I want you to see that. Oh, there we go. Let's get the better map. There we go, right there. You'll notice when we're gonna see this in the text, they're at Fair Havens and they're gonna they're headed for where? Do you remember where they went to winter? We talked about last week. Anybody remember? They're headed for Phoenix, right? So they're headed for this better harbor that's a lot more protected, and they want to winter there. So they head that way, but this northeaster is blowing, and look what it does to the ship. Blows them way off to the southwest. So we see that weather system really having an impact when you don't have diesel motors or any kind of a big engine to drive you. You're just subject to the weather at that point. Okay, let me get back down where I was. Okay, there we are. This is that same satellite shot of Crete, and I want to mention, because they mention Cauda, the island of Cauda. That's this little island right here. So they get blown right along this direction past Cauda. That's, if you look it up on Google Maps today, it's called Gavdos. Gavdos is the name of that little island. Okay, so Don asked the question last week, where did all the wheat come from in the first century? Which was a good question. So he found some information, and I just summarized it here in one of the paragraphs he sent me. It says, in summary, wheat was grown extensively in Galilee and across Palestine, especially in the fertile, well-watered areas north and east of Jerusalem, and its cultivation was central to the daily life and economy of the people of Jesus' time. So there was wheat grown in the Palestine, Israel, Judea area. I've got a map here that we'll look at here in just a minute that talks about different agricultural products and where they were grown. But I also found this interesting, and this is going to be borne out a little bit more when we get into Dr. Manner's video for chapter 50, when he talks about wheat production and this ship. How big is this ship, by the way? How many people are on this ship besides the cargo? 276, right? There's a lot of people on this ship, and I will say this, I'm not a Bible scholar, but when they put up these little models of these ships and say this is similar to the ship that Paul was on, it doesn't look like it'd hold anywhere near 276 people, not to mention a cargo of wheat. So I'm thinking this is a rather large ship that they're on. This note from Erdmann's dictionary says that like agricultural and industry, trade too was largely local during New Testament times. There were two interesting exceptions, however. One was waterborne commerce in agricultural commodities in the Mediterranean region. There were large-scale exports of wheat from Egypt, Sicily, North Africa to Rome, and wheat was probably exported to some larger cities in the Eastern Mediterranean. And again, we'll see more about this in Dr. Manner's video after a while. So wheat was, and grain was largely exported from Egypt. We're told that this was a ship from Alexandria and it's headed for Rome. So it's likely wheat that's on board when it talks about the grain. Any idea, just anybody want to speculate? It mentions two interesting exceptions. Anybody know what the other exception might have been? That wasn't local, that was shipped around a lot? It was wine. So wine from Italy, wine from all different places was shipped around all throughout that region. So grain and wine were not necessarily just local products. They were exported and traded widely. Okay, here's that map that shows different agricultural products. So grapes, olives, dates, figs, pottery, wheat, and fishing. So you see there's a lot of wheat here. These are olives. Here's grapes in this area. There's some more olives here, this area, and figs. So it's pretty interesting to kind of see where things were grown during that time. Okay, we're going to get caught back up. So this is Fair Havens, and we left it off at the end of verse 8. May we read that? Let's see where I've got my next marker. Well, let's pick it up at 9. So on 8, you'll notice it says, they're in Myra, in Lycia, and it says, there the centurion, verse 6, found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete, off Salmone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. So this is Fair Havens off the coast of Lycia. And here's that little, this would have been the harbor where they pulled in, trying to find shelter. So let's pick it up in verse 9 of 27. Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Okay, so this is interesting. So we talked last time about the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, today. Do you remember the Jewish month and day of the month that they were supposed to observe that? 7th month, 10th day, okay? And we've got our handy calendar here. So I put a circle on it so we can kind of see ballpark where it was. So it's the months of Tishri, the 7th month, and the 10th day, and this was, it says the fast had passed, was behind them, so they're well into October probably at this point. We notice from this next chart that this is optimal sailing conditions is from May to about September, and you start getting in here and sailing is dangerous. And it's right here, it says sailing is closed, at least in ancient times, from November 11th to about March 5th when things started to improve again. So it's largely during the spring and the summer and the early fall when you could sail. And things are starting to get rough now, and they're seeing the winds pick up. They're having trouble making progress. And things do kind of turn bad. We looked at this note last time, and it also mentioned poor visibility, and we talked about that, right? Because they navigated by the stars. That's one of the ways that they were able to determine where they were going. They didn't have GPS. Actually, they had GPS, nobody had batteries. No, just kidding. They didn't have any of those kind of things, and they had to navigate by the stars. That's all that was available. And if you didn't have visibility, it's really easy to get lost. Okay. What did Paul share with the centurion there in 10? Yeah, this is a dangerous, this is not looking good. You're going to lose the cargo. You're probably going to lose some lives. It says much loss, not only of the cargo, but also of our lives. And now who's deliberating all this information that Paul's sharing? The centurion. Who else? The owner of the ship is there, the pilot, and they're all trying to figure out what they're going to do next, right? They're having some sort of a nice meeting, I guess. What are we going to do? The weather's getting really bad on us. What are we going to do? And Paul warns them, and they say, "Wow, Paul, you're absolutely right. We should consider what you say." What did they say? What did they do? I'm sorry? They disregard him. They go, "Well, this guy's a prisoner. What does he know?" So one of the things I want you to kind of notice, it's kind of a side story through this whole chapter 27, is the notion of 27 and 28 is the notion of pagan deities and pagan beliefs versus the living God. And you kind of see them contrasted in a few places as we go through this. And Paul represents the living God, and we'll see some of these other people are either interested in their financial situation, their investment in the boat, other things. We'll see a mention in later, I think it's in 28, where we see a mention of some pagan deities. And it's interesting how this all plays out and what the results are because of Paul's faith and how God works in this whole situation. So they didn't give him much house on his concerns. Why did they not want to stay at Fair Havens? Verse 12. It's not a good spot to winter. So there's a couple of really good tips here. I really enjoy this stuff. I hope you do too. You're pulling out these little nuggets, right? So one nugget of timing is the fact of the date of the feast, right? So we know the date of the feast, the 7th Jewish month, the 10th day. So we know that. The other tip about timing here is this comment about winter. So winter's apparently getting close, and they're trying to find a place to take shelter. So that's another little hint as to what time of year it is and what's going on. Okay, where do they hope to harbor? Where were they headed? We mentioned it a minute ago. Right there in Arizona. No. Down the southwest edge of Crete, the deeper harbor, better place to winter if you're trying to take shelter. It's a better place to go. Now, I wrestled with this and had to do a little bit more research about this comment that's made here that Luke makes. Scanning. There it is in 12. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there. I struggled with understanding that word. Get everybody, all 276 people, and say, who wants to go to Phoenix and who wants to stay at Fair Havens? Do you think that's what happened? Probably not. Probably the people that really got to vote on this were who? The owner of the ship. The owner's probably got it. And the centurion, and probably the pilot, and the crew, because they were going to have to make it work, right? So they're probably not asking all 276 people on board, hey, what do y'all think? Should we go on or not? Because what do they know, right? It's going to be the people that have a vested interest that are leading this vessel. They're going to make the determination as to where they're going to go. Okay. So they're going to make a break for Phoenix is what they hope to do. Oh, okay. On to chapter 50. This gets really exciting, doesn't it? The whole sailing thing in the ship and where they are at this point. Okay, we've seen this map. You can see the way that their course bends south pretty dramatically right here. So they're going to try and go from there to right there to Phoenix, you can see that little island right there, Cauda, just off the coast. And they're going to try and make a break for it. So there's Phoenix and Cape Moros, where they're going to try to reach. Okay, let's watch this video on Alexandrian ships. This is Dr. Manner's next video.
So from the beginning of this transportation from Caesarea to Rome, it appears that the intent was that Paul would somewhere along the route have to change ships. When they get to Lycia, he's going to be transferred to another boat. And the Bible reads in the narration, Acts chapter 27, "When we had sailed through the sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. And there the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy, and he put us aboard it." Now, the text will go on to say, in Acts 28, verse 11, after another transfer has taken place, "At the end of 3 months, we set sail on an Alexandrian ship, which had wintered at the island, and which had the twin brothers for its figurehead." It's interesting, both of these boats are referred to as Alexandrian ships. And this appears to be a term that is used because of the heavy reliance that the city of Rome in particular has upon grain coming from Egypt. And that grain would be shipped out of the port at Alexandria. And hence these are boats that would travel to Alexandria and then eventually to Rome and back and so forth, carrying grain. This is a model of one of those ships transporting grain from Alexandria to Rome. And again, Rome relied extremely heavily upon this resource for food. But because of the peril into which this boat goes as the transfer occurs at Lycia to the Alexandrian ship, they're going to have to dump the wheat overboard. And the Bible explicitly refers to this in Acts chapter 27, verse 38, where in order to lighten the boat, they toss the goods overboard so that the ship can buoy a little more easily in the rough seas. But why this reliance upon grain from Egypt? Most of us remember the famine that is described in the book of Genesis, dealing with the preservation of the family of Jacob and so forth. But in reality, Egypt was a breadbasket for a lot of the ancient world. Because of the Nile River and its relative consistency, the Nile provided Egypt with a relatively stable food supply. And the children of Israel, particularly in that episode where there's the Korah's rebellion, people rising up against the leadership of Moses, and listen to their complaint. "Is it not enough that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to have us die in the wilderness, but you would also lord it over us?" Now, obviously, we normally remember a land flowing with milk and honey to refer to the land of Canaan, and I'm not disputing that at all. But it's interesting they refer to the land of Egypt in this fashion. Earlier, we have a description in the book of Exodus, chapter 16, verses 2 and 3. And listen to the people, the children of Israel, in their complaints here. "The whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The sons of Israel said to them, 'Would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger.'" Admittedly, you might write off their description as being sort of that idealistic view of the past. But in reality, the food resources in the land of Egypt were really fairly stable and secure. And if you travel there today, you can see a lot of heavily cultivated land. And just look at the lush green that is along the water edge here. In the Delta region, which is basically where the children of Israel live. It's sort of like California. If you get water to the soil, it'll grow a lot. And with the Delta region in particular, they were able to build the canals and distribute the food into the fields. And Rome was relying upon this heavily. Josephus indicates that Alexandria, Egypt sent enough grain to Rome to feed the city for 4 months out of a year. I mean, that's a massive amount of grain. And Paul is in one of these boats that has gone awry out in this open seas, and the whole thing is running the risk of devastation and loss. And so they throw the grain overboard. A similar kind of reference to a grain ship is by Lucian in his book, The Ship or the Wishes. And he states that he saw a ship in Piraeus, which is a port there in Athens, writing about AD 150, a ship that could carry enough grain to feed every soul in Attica. Now, Attica in this case would be the area of Athens and the area surrounding this. I mean, these are huge ships. And Paul is an incidental passenger on one of these boats. Again, when I say incidental, the point is the primary purpose of the boat was to carry grain. The passengers on board are just sort of secondary. But Paul, of course, becomes a very significant figure in the preservation of the people on that boat. And they're going to shipwreck at Malta.
Just sit there and listen to that guy all day long. So there's one of those things that kind of jumped off the page for me. And I don't know how many times I've read it, but I never noticed it before. You ever done that? Read the Bible over and over again, and all of a sudden there's a particular verse, you go, wow, where did that come from? But his reference there to the land flowing with milk and honey, referring to Egypt, I didn't remember that. I thought that was interesting, because if you say land flowing with milk and honey, I think of Canaan right off the top. But it's interesting that when they were complaining, that's what they referenced. So let's pick it up in 13 and read through 20. A lot going on in this passage. Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land, and when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulties to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along, since we were violently storm-tossed. They began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. That's where I want to stop right there. Wow. So why did they set sail, and where did they go? Verse 13. What made them want to sail? They were wanting to get to Phoenix. And what changed with the wind?
From the south.
Wind changed from the south, and it was a gentle wind. Yeah.
Can I just
Please.
egg-head it up a little bit? These ancient square-rigged sail ships were at the mercy of the direction of the wind.
Yes.
Like modern ships, and like modern, I call 1600s and on, where they worked out a way they could sail against the wind.
Yes.
These ships could not do that.
Okay.
Total technology over 1,000, 1,200, 1,600 years has really advanced. Sailing.
Are you a sailor? Have you sailed some?
No, but I understand
Okay.
the mechanics of it.
So yeah.
Jib sail, they can sail against the wind.
Yeah. Was it the jib, or was it the fact that they had,
The jib can redirect the opposing.
they could adjust the sail angle?
They didn't have that tech. I hadn't figured that out yet.
So we were kicking that around I think it was last week. Is that called tacking?
Yeah.
When you go kind of at an angle?
And it's mostly because of these big square reefs. Think of the Spanish galleons, the British ships, and the sail of that era, the 1700s. It didn't matter. They had much better control. They understood ballast, the ruders,
Yeah.
everything. Just like I said, think forward 1,000, 1,200, 1,600 years. They figured these things out.
Yeah. Not so much back then. And you get that sense because it says they were driven by the wind. So they're kind of at the mercy of whichever way the wind was blowing. Okay, good. So they set sail, they wanted to get to Phoenix. The wind was blowing gently from the south, which would have been nice because they could get it. I mean, they're headed for Rome, right? What type of storm hit them? It says a northeaster, so a wind with directions from the northeast hit them. I've always been fascinated by weather, so I had to chase this one when I was preparing. Nowadays, you can get these little weather systems that spin up around these islands and all the different land masses and bodies of water. And depending on the time of year and the water temperature, which you'll notice is, you'll remember is a big factor in the development of hurricanes today. They call them medicanes. I called it Medicaid at breakfast this morning. Medicanes, so Mediterranean hurricanes, those develop now in the Mediterranean. They're not as big as the hurricanes that we have around the United States and off the coast, but they can still be pretty devastating. Whatever it was that hit Paul and his group is described as a northeaster. So the wind is cutting down from northeast to southwest across Crete as they're trying to go by. And you've got that 8,000-foot peak, Mount Ida, and that valley beside it, west of it, that are kind of acting like a wind tunnel, and that wind is just blowing right through there. And you can see that's right where it seems to catch them. So they weren't able to make Phoenix. What happened to the ship there in verse 15? They were driven along. They were caught by the wind. As Steve mentioned, there was nothing they could do about it. It was a powerful wind, and they were just subject to whichever way it was going to blow. So they were driven along. What island did they pass near? They're in 16, Cauda. And it says, what did they do with the ship's boat? Yeah, so you're thinking the same way I was thinking. I'm thinking, okay, they've got lifeboats on this thing. No, they didn't.
It's not really a lifeboat. It's a boat they use. They can't, unless there's a good jetty and pier and stuff, right? They can't pull the big boat up to shore. So they use the ship's boat to transport people and cargo.
Used for maneuvering. Sometimes they use it to help position anchors. I mean, it was just a kind of a little utility boat, if you want to think of it that way, a little jetty that they towed behind them to help them when they needed it, something that was a little bit more maneuverable, a little smaller. So they would call that the ship's boat. So what did they do with the ship's boat in 16? They secured it somehow, right? So you get the idea that it's getting tossed around pretty good in the back. Somehow they brought it up closer to the ship, got some ropes around it, something. They were able to secure that boat somehow. Here's a note from the .NET Bible first edition. The ship's boat was a small rowboat normally towed behind a ship in good weather rather than stowed on board. It was used for landings, to maneuver the ship for tacking, to lay anchors, not a lifeboat in the modern sense, although it could have served as a means of escape for some of the sailors. You're not going to get 276 people off with a boat like this. So it's not a very large boat at all. This is the satellite view of the island of Cauda, not really big. It's modern day Gavdos, just southwest of Crete. And here's the northern shore of Cauda. So they're driven past this little island. There's a beach on the northern shore of Cauda. Okay, what did they do to strengthen the ship there in verse 17? Yeah, it says they use supports, it says. We don't have a good idea of maybe some extra boards that they had or something. They kind of were trying to undergird the ship and strengthen it because of the violence of the storm and make it a little bit more seaworthy, I guess, able to take the storm. What were they afraid of, and what did they do there in verse 17? Then fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. And I think I've got, yeah. So this is Libya. This is Tunisia. This is Syrtis Major. Here's Crete, and there's that little island Cauda. And the sandbars in the Syrtis extend way out from the northern coast of Africa, and it's easy to run aground in those sandbars. And they were afraid that that might happen. And since they're being blown this way, they could just kind of see that happening, right? So they're really afraid that they're going to get blown into this, what they call the Syrtis. And I thought, well, geography like that doesn't just change because of time necessarily. So I did some more research and asked, do mariners today still worry about the Syrtis? Is it still a problem today? And running aground or getting in trouble there on the northern coast of Africa? And the answer was yes, but not because of the geography. It's for political reasons. So this is a map of what Libya claims as their search and rescue zone. Well, this goes, you can see how far up this is. This is like clear up nearly to Crete. It's way past international boundary waters. So they're way up into the Mediterranean to claim this Libyan search and rescue zone. They claim this is their zone to protect, and the Libyan Coast Guard is very aggressive in protecting that area against vessels that intrude in that area. So mariners have to look. I was looking online. NATO's got charts, information on how to report incidents. It's pretty interesting to read, but they have to watch out for mines. They have to watch out for rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs. They have to watch out for missiles. There's all kinds of things that you watch out for in that area of the Mediterranean because of Libya's claim to the search and rescue zone. I just thought that was interesting. Nobody worries about the Syrtis anymore because of modern navigational aids and ways to identify other vessels in the area. It was pretty interesting. Okay, what did they do the next day in 18? In 18, they started throwing the cargo overboard, right? They're jettisoning the cargo. I wonder how many times the word jettison is used in the New Testament. Probably not a lot. They start throwing the cargo overboard to make the boat more buoyant. They're 19. What did they do on that third day of the storm? They're throwing the ship's tackle overboard. So everything that they use to run the sails, the boat itself, they are just throwing it all over. And it says with their own hands, like, I guess to kind of drive the point home, they knew what they were doing. They were that desperate, right? It wasn't like it fell or got washed off the deck or anything like that. They threw the ship's tackle overboard. What caused them to despair after many days? They're in 20. No sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest. I like the way it states that in the negative. No small tempest lay on us. All hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. So despair for life sweeps over the crew and the passengers, and they're thinking at this point they're not going to make it. They've done everything they can. They don't know where they are. They can't orient themselves. They have no navigation, and they're just being blown, and they don't know what's next. So, wow, that's a cliffhanger, isn't it? We'll leave it right there. Thank you for your comments, and we'll pick it up here next week.